Welcome one, welcome all. It is Tuesday. It is 5 p.m. Central Time, which means, it is time for a Blogging the Boys roundtable here on the Blogging the Boys YouTube channel. You can watch us live. You can hang out with us after the fact. Of course, catch the rewatch. You can listen to this every single week, every single Tuesday on the Blogging the Boys podcast network. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a rating, write a review. We have tons of great shows coming out there every day. In fact, we have 2 shows that come out every single day, even in the off season. There is no stopping us. We are all obsessed with the Dallas Cowboys and talking about them, discussing them, analyzing them, etc. Speaking of 2, though, today's roundtable is a twosome. It is just myself. I'm RJ Ochoa, and it is the legendary, the incomparable, one of the founding fathers, the OGs, the originals of Blogging the Boys, Tom Ryle, who you can hear on the Blogging the Boys podcast network every Thursday on Riled Up. You can read on the pages of bloggingtheboys.com. You can see him on a lot of our roundtables, and of course, follow him on Twitter at Tom Ryle BTB. Thomas, thank you for hanging out with me and just me tonight on the roundtable.
No problem. Sometimes you can have the best conversations just one-on-one,
That's true. Because this is your show, this is the Tom show, really, if we're being honest. I came to you, I said, what do you want to talk about tonight, Tom? Earlier today when we were slacking back and forth, and you had a subject. So this is your thing. We're going to dive in. Right now I feel like we're at like one of those Brazilian steakhouses, and we're flipping the card over to the green side. Just serve us the stuff. Serve us this subject matter, and we're going to dive in. So go ahead, set the stage however you want. I don't want to take your thing. Let us know as Ethan checks in, says, hey guys, what's up, Ethan? What we're going to be talking about this afternoon/evening.
Yeah. I thought it would probably happen. I was kind of hopeful after the discontent that permeated the offseason for the Cowboys that maybe we wouldn't do this so much. But out there in social media, it seems to be happening. People are mixing up the blue and silver Kool-Aid and guzzling it down, convincing themselves how everything's going to work out just great. And they're starting to, kind of pump up their expectations. You have this little sarcastic habit of something happens about the Cowboys and you throw out 17-0, but it's, you're joking. We know that. There are people out there that are really convincing themselves that this team has the problems fixed, that the solutions are all good. And as you were mentioning when we were kind of hashing this out beforehand, they're often doing a 180 from what they were saying, correct?
So to be clear, I maintain that this is true, what I'm about to say, in that I believe this is the most dejected, most apathetic I've seen a large contingency of Dallas Cowboys fans. I think that group has existed every offseason for the last almost 3 decades, right? I think this is the largest swath of that we have ever seen. Now, I do think we have seen, like if all of these Cowboys fans have been on strike, I do think we've seen some cross the picket line, right? Like we've seen some, some have come back to the man, so to speak, and some have come at different stages, right? Like there were the people who, for whatever reason, were like juiced up by the James Washington signing or the Dante Fowler signing, like that got them to cross, right? Like I don't want any scab taking my job, right? Like I'm back here, I'm ready to roll. There were some people who, were naturally enthused with the draft, right? Maybe for some people it was the blockchain announcement, who knows? But I do think that the largest crossover, so to speak, happened after the schedule release. I think that for some reason spoke to people, maybe, and even though we knew all the opponents, obviously, I think if I'm not a psychologist by any means, but if I had to delve into the psychology of it all, I think it's because now it becomes real. Now we can buy tickets. Now we can plan a trip. Now we can say we're going to go to Nashville in late December. We're going to do this. And so you can put a tangible sort of taste around it. And so now you're like, you have to be committed, which is why you have to cross that picket line of emotion, so to speak. But to your point, I do think that there are people now coming back, talking themselves into it, and we're starting to see the same sort of rhyme and rhythm that we have seen forever. This is the part of the scary movie where, like, they knock the bad guy out and just leave him on the ground with a chainsaw or whatever, and you're wondering, why are you doing this? Cut his head off, take the weapon away. But lo and behold, the bad guy's coming to get us all in the very end.
Yeah, and as you said, we knew what the schedule was going to be. We knew the opponents because the NFL uses a fairly simple formula to figure out how it works. There's a rotation of divisions, and then you play one extra team here and there. And we've said for a while that alone, the fact that it looked like the slate of opponents was weaker this year, that the Cowboys could still make the playoffs even with a worse team.
This is something you talked about, by the way, on Riled Up last week with Roy White. You actually mentioned what I wrote about. It's not even the teams that they're playing. It's the quarterbacks. The quarterbacks that they're slated to play are awful, and it could get worse. I mean, obviously, you have injuries and whatnot, but and spoiler alert, on this week's NFC East mixtape, which drops on Wednesday, Brandon Gouton from Bleeding Green Nation, big theme, Bleeding Green Nation here is today on the Roundtable, Tom, but we'll get there. We predicted the wins and losses for every Dallas Cowboys, Philadelphia Eagles, Washington Commanders, and New York Giants game, and the Cowboys get the Titans later than anybody else in the division. Like, is it going to be Ryan Tannehill? Is it going to be Malik Willis? Like, we don't know, so those things could lend to their favor as well.
Yeah, and even when you look at that, the problem is that from year to year in the NFL, there are regressions to the mean. One of those happens with the one-loss record. Teams that are really bad tend to have a bit better one-loss record. Teams that are really good tend to have a little bit worse one-loss record the following year. So since the Cowboys are facing a bunch of teams that had bad one-loss records last year, they're most likely to see the opponents actually get better over the course of the season.
So on the subject, regression to the mean could be like the title of its own podcast. Maybe that's something we workshop. But I think regression to the mean happens most strongly in two different capacities across, you could argue, all of sports, but certainly the NFL. One is from an injury standpoint. Teams who lose a lot of players and therefore a lot of games lose an enormous amount of, whatever to injury, generally regress towards the mean the very next year. In 2020, Tom, do you know which two teams were the most affected by injuries? So I'm talking the 2020 season, to be very clear here.
20. Weren't the Cowboys?
They were number 2.
Yeah.
The number 1, the San Francisco 49ers. And look what the Niners did last year. You know what I mean? Like, we certainly know that lesson very well. Do you know who was the least impacted by injuries in 2020?
I think the Cowboys.
In 2020, Tom. Still 2020.
Oh, in 20. No, I'm sorry.
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who won the Super Bowl, right? So, I mean, it's just interesting. And so you look like, this is just, if you care about the NFL, that's why the Baltimore Ravens are such a vogue pick to be back this year, because they lost so many corners and players and running backs and all sorts of whatnots to different injuries last year. And so it stands to reason that they'll regress, to the mean. That's the big one, injuries. The other one is turnovers defensively. We talk about this. We've been harping on this all off season long. And I know a lot of people are probably like, why are you guys like condemning the Cowboys defense? Why don't you believe? We totally believe. But like, if we base things off of the 100-year history of the NFL, then it's extremely likely that this defense is going to regress in some capacity. And I point to no example, Tom, greater in the sense of kind of like awakening Cowboys fans. A year ago, we were so frustrated as Cowboys fans that national talk shows were picking the Commanders, then the football team, obviously, to repeat as division champs. And the whole premise behind their logic was, if this defense just kind of stays the course, Ryan Fitzpatrick can do enough. And what happened to that defense? It not only regressed to the mean, it went to the other extreme. It literally traveled all the way across the spectrum. Now, that's a harder regression than generally happens. And they did kind of stabilize as the season went on, although not against the Cowboys, obviously. But so, like, that happened. You know what I mean? That happened in this division, which opened the door for the Cowboys last year. And so to that point, I mentioned Bleeding Green Nation, BGN alum Jimmy Kempsky from the Philly Voice. I saw you tweeted about this today, tweeted that the Cowboys led the NFL with 34 takeaways in 2021. He noted a list, Tom, of 13 teams who recently had at least 30 takeaways in a season. Do you know the smallest drop-off the next season?
I think it was like 7 or 8.
It was 6.
I looked at 6.
The 2018 Rams generated 30 takeaways on defense, and the next year generated 24. Do you know the largest drop-off?
I was up there. 17, something big like that.
18. The 2017 Detroit Lions generated 32 takeaways, and the next year only 14.
And people are not acknowledging how phenomenal what Trayvon Diggs did was. He there had been no player get 11 interceptions since 1981. And admittedly, it's now a longer season and everything. Still, for years, the most anybody could get was 10 interceptions in a season, and he pops up and gets 11. He could still lead the NFL in interceptions and only get 7
I
or
think
6 because you don't always see double digit interceptions in the NFL.
it was so frustrating. And I know that we're talking about like good things that happened to the Cowboys, so it wasn't frustrating in that sense. But I remember after the first game of the season, I write winners and losers every week on our site after every single game, and I didn't hype up the defense, from a turnover standpoint after they lost the Buck. There was a big kind of positive energy after the loss to Tampa in Week 1, and a lot of people were hyped up because of the turnovers, and I was of the mindset like, why are we applauding this? The big turnovers that game. Trayvon's pick came off of a ball that went off of Leonard Fournette's hands on a screen pass from Tom Brady, which is a fluky thing. Like you can't guarantee that. And Jordan Lewis had an interception at the end of the first half on a Hail Mary, you know what I mean? That was just kind of like a throw-up play, whatever. And Demonte Kazee, Chris Godwin just like dropped the ball near the end zone, which gave life to the Cowboys near the final end of that drive. And even the next week, speaking of Demonte Kazee, Justin Herbert, who's a fantastic quarterback, weirdly threw it sort of directly at Demonte right in the end zone as that game was getting tight. There were these weird, sticky turnovers that do not happen, that were so like, even the Diggs pick in New England that he housed and kept the Cowboys alive in that. There were these weird things that you cannot count on, tip balls that are so likely going to regress this coming season, which is part of why we were so devastated when last year didn't end the way we wanted it to.
Yeah, and the NFL plays with the most oddly shaped ball in all of sports. It's pointy on both ends. It takes funny bounces. It caroms off of another player in funny directions. And the Cowboys just kept coming up, just kept rolling 7s last year or 11s. I'm not good at dice, so I don't know which is best. But they kept, they kept, just kept rolling the hot number over and over. And you can't say it's never going to happen, but it's almost guaranteed that it's not going to be as favorable for them. And they have some issues on defense that we don't know for sure about the answers to. One of them is Sam Williams really going to be the answer? I'm thrilled by Dan Quinn working with him, but that doesn't mean he's going to be there this year. Remember, it took Diggs a couple seasons to really click.
I do think along those lines, and this is something I have, I do a lot of shows and a lot of podcasts and stuff. This is something I have never vocalized. I've almost even never let myself like have this cognitive thought. But what was our biggest criticism of the Taco Charlton pick and the Tristan Hill pick? What was our biggest criticism of those things?
That the coaches picked them on their
right. That it was coach led, that they didn't trust the scouting department over that it was Rod Marinelli who had developed too much sway throughout the draft process. And I am in no way trying to knock Dan Quinn. He had a marvelous season, but we've seen marvelous seasons. Remember how in love people were with Rod Marinelli, with Monty Kiffin at one point in time. People were in love. Remember how in love people were with Chris Richard? And so what happens if a year from now the Cowboys defense isn't this like world beater and they do regress and whatever this and that and the other? Are we now suddenly like totally completely like come all in love with Dan Quinn and trusting the selection of Sam Williams to him because he got his guy? Didn't Dan Quinn get his guy in Deshaun Wright last year? Like how'd that turn out? And again, I'm not trying to sling arrows at Dan Quinn here, but it's ironic that we're totally fine with this because it literally abides by the philosophy that we condemn because it didn't work out with other players.
Yeah, there's a lot of recency bias clicking right there because everybody says, "Oh, look what a great improvement." Okay. Yeah, well, first off, he got them to a really good place, at least on the stat sheet, and it certainly seemed to bear up in the regular season results. But you can't necessarily hold that. As you said, Cowboys had a lot better injury history last year, and they kind of had a unicorn. You don't have a new Micah Parsons walking onto this roster.
That has set them up so like
Mm-hmm.
horribly for failure.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to just be negative, but this is a reality. And the whole subject that you wanted to talk about was like Kool-Aid sipping. How many times did you see, Tom, in the lead up to the draft was like, I remember a lot of people being upset with the drafting of Micah Parsons. So let's just calm down. That's it. Like, because they struck gold. It's like, it's not even that they struck gold. They literally got struck by lightning and developed superpowers. And so like their plan is to go to the same spot that they were struck by lightning and literally ask for it to hit them again and expect the same result to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just, it's crazy.
Yeah. And that, I think, skewed things so much because nobody in the league quite realized what he was. And even by the end of the season, people were still trying to figure out how to handle him and not having a lot of success. Now you see people trying to make that comparison with Sam Williams. Ooh, he's got a lot of the same traits. Ooh, he is not the same kind of player that Parsons is. He may develop into something that will pair very nicely, like the right wine and the right cheese. They may go together very well on the field, but don't expect that to all just be wonderful and shiny. And the ironic thing is that Quinn may do a very good job coaching this year. It just won't look like it because they won't have those kinds of turnovers. They won't be as spectacular and flashy. The Cowboys may have success just because they figure out how to stop the run a little better. That ain't flashy.
So do you really believe that a lot of people are now back, Tom, that the Kool-Aid... Sorry, I had to sneeze. Thank you.
I could tell what was going on there.
I muted it for the podcast audience, but
that was good.
But do you think that, like, I mean, because I do kind of expect there to be, there is this sense of apathy, as just one small example, when the schedule came out last week, DeMarcus Lawrence tweeted, or actually it was, because you know how they released week 1 before the whole thing. And so DeMarcus Lawrence in that window tweeted out revenge or something like that, because the Cowboys playing the Buccaneers again. And so, some of the responses are your classic, like, let go, tank, whatever, sacks coming, whatever. But a lot of responses are like, okay, like a lot of responses are like, yeah, sure. Yeah. You guys are going to be chasing him around while he throws for 400 yards. Like, I do still believe that a lot of people have yet to cross the picket line, more so than ever at this point. Those numbers may be dwindling, but I do believe that consensus is still out there.
See, I guess part of the thing is I don't view it as apathy because I think a lot of people still care about the team despite their protestations. What I am trying to cultivate in myself is a healthy skepticism about the preseason hype, about pumping these players up. I saw that somebody, I can't remember who, I'd have to go back and look at the site, but somebody rated the Cowboys as having the best UDFA crop in the NFL. And
that was Thor Nystrom from NBC Sports Edge. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And it's like
we have an article coming out on that at Block of the Boys tomorrow on Wednesday. Just so
that's why I was trying to cast back because I saw that it was in Q, but I haven't had a chance to read it. So what? It's like you get what, 1 or 2 players out of your UDFA.
Tom, I'm stunned at this, like, Eeyore attitude going on.
And the Cowboys have a real advantage because one of them is the guy that looks to be the heir apparent at kicker. That's a very common path for kickers into the NFL.
Sure, and if you have one starter from your UDFA class, like you're already batting well above the average UDFA class in the NFL, right? I agree with you. Again, maybe I'm sipping the Kool-Aid. Maybe it's like a slow sip, maybe maybe it's like an IV I've hooked up, you know what I mean? like it's a slow drip or something. I was feeling a little bit optimistic, a little bit less so now. So I guess that's the impact that you've had. But I don't know. I mean, and I go back and forth. This is the the sort of experience I'm the most confounded by, right? Like I have followed the Dallas Cowboys my whole life, like everybody here, to an intense degree for a large, portion of it, obviously in a professional sense for a large portion of it. And if we think back, I've said many times that the Cowboys have not been back-to-back playoff contenders or playoff teams since 2006 and 2007, and that they have not even had double-digit wins in consecutive seasons since 1995 and 1996. That history has nothing to do with this team, but it's there, right? Like you can't just ignore it. But I think it's interesting when we look back on the recent division titles, the most recent, if we talk about maybe since in the Romo era and beyond, right? Because that's kind of when a large amount of things change. And I think we like the luck sort of started for the Cowboys, like where they landed Romo and Dak. So if we look at 2007, obviously a phenomenal season. 2014 or 2009, if you want to count 2009 as well. 2014, a phenomenal season. So that's your third one. 2016, and then 2018. That's 5 division titles. The 5 years following all of those seasons, if you were around, whether you were on the internet, if you were, in the comment section at Blog on the Boys way back when, if you've been on Twitter, whatever, the 5 years, Tom, following all of those division winning campaigns were full of nothing, but they won the Super Bowl. They're back. Like it was nothing but like unyielded, unrelenting optimism, and not like there was not a drop of Kool-Aid to be had. I mean, it was scarfing the Kool-Aid. You couldn't get your hands on Kool-Aid. It was like Troy Aikman's new beer. You know what I mean? Like it was just crazy. And this is the most, like, they won the division. And I'm not saying like that's an accomplishment, or I'm not saying like how dare anybody be pessimistic. That's not my stance at all. But this is the same thing. This is the same story. And maybe the reason for the healthy skepticism is because we've seen it 5 times. But I find that phenomenon to be interesting, that despite the literal success they had last year, that people do treat this team this offseason like it's a team that won 4 games a year ago.
Yeah. And I do think, I think it's just a culmination of the disappointment that you mentioned, and the fact that I think Stephen Jones in particular really burned the fans with how he handled things from the end of the season until the draft. It just maybe people just noticed it more, and I think that is why people are taking what I think is the right way, a wait and see attitude. The Cowboys do have one thing that I stumbled across, did an article on that should be up probably tomorrow, Wednesday, for those that are listening to this on the podcast.
Good job, Tom.
Yeah, a guy at The Athletic, and I have to go back and look at the name of the author. I apologize. He noted the fact that Aaron Rodgers, Derek Carr, and Dak Prescott are the only quarterbacks that have been with their teams for 5 years or longer.
So I believe it was Stephen Holder.
That's right. It is Stephen Holder.
And I think that you are, I don't mean this the like aggressive way it sounds, I think you're wrong. I believe Aaron Rodgers was on that list as well.
Didn't I just say Aaron Rodgers?
I'm sorry. I was looking it up because you couldn't remember his name. I was doing the work for you. But go ahead.
Yeah, he was the first one because he's obviously the senior guy. And there is a very good chance that Aaron Rodgers is going to retire someday, unless he's found Tom Brady's secret magic drug or whatever. And Dak Prescott's going to become the longest tenured quarterback in the NFL, I think.
So you think that I guess what you're saying, just to be clear for people, is that Aaron Rodgers' time in Green Bay and Derek Carr's time with the Raiders, despite the new extension, will expire before Dak Prescott's time with the Cowboys.
Yeah, I think
right.
Because one of the other themes he had was that teams are not as patient with their quarterback, and if Carr doesn't get something going, that he may be gone. Dak, frankly, has shown enough, I think, right now that they aren't going to get impatient with him as quickly. And that's also just because that's the way that Jerry Jones is, And he's coming in healthy this year. He may be the one thing that could really turn out well for the team. Will that be enough to counter everything else? I don't know. I just think we need to be ready for the fact that not everything is going to be all, Skittles and beer. It's not going to be all rainbows and unicorns.
So a couple things here. First of all, I say all the time, I like to look at time weirdly. Dak Prescott has obviously been the Cowboys quarterback for a long time. He's been the quarterback for 6 years. Just to put that in perspective, 6 years is how long Tony Romo played with Des Bryant as teammates, as the starting quarterback. That's crazy. Like when you think, like it's been that long, it's nuts to think about. But speaking of Des, something that I have said many times before in talking about flaws in NFL team building, not just the Cowboys, but it was my belief at the time in 2015 that the Cowboys built their team, and I think that this even rippled into the 2016 offseason and the drafting of Zeke. They, for so long, like a 2-year little window there, tried to build their team as if they could pick up at Lambeau Field where Dez caught it in the divisional round of the playoffs. That was they built it as if they could start right there, and you can't. You cannot just because you had success in that way, playing that kind of football, that style, that scheme, whatever, that approach, that one season, great. That in no way means it's going to yield the same fruit the following year. And they have made the mistake of believing that year after year after year. And so to some degree, in a very, very weird way, I sort of not applaud, but I understand, like, okay, you're looking at this picture a different way. It's like one of those, you're unfocusing the image of last year to try to, climb the mountain all over again. But it's difficult to understand. I mean, Johnny Boyaren has a great comment kind of talking about the apathy or healthy skepticism against. I don't think it's rooted in what they did last year.
Oh, no,
as
RJ.
opposed to the dismantling of the team's core topped off with arrogant posture. That is how they planned it. And I agree that they do present this like, and the best example, I think the thing that really exposed them this offseason, Tom, let me reword this. I think if not for the Randy Gregory situation, I think there would have been a lot of Kool-Aid drinkers, to use your terminology, saying we don't need Amari Cooper. Amari quit. He never showed up on the road. Like there would have been a lot of people standing for every decision that the Cowboys front office made. But the Randy Gregory thing, and more specifically, the way they have reacted to that has exposed them in saying like, oh, well, so what? Randy's gone. We got Dorrance Armstrong and Leighton Vander Esch and Dante Fowler out of it. We got 3 players instead of 1. Why are you guys mad? You know what I mean? Like they've tried to sell it so poorly that it has really kind of exposed how badly they botched that.
Yeah, and the fact that they actually had multiple really bad mess ups in the minds of some, or very poorly handled situations. The Cooper thing was terribly handled because they telegraphed that they were not going to try to keep him, which just gave teams no reason to offer anything in the way of trade
to that point. Just to very quickly interrupt you, Tom. People hear you say, like people like you say that, and they say, so what that they, they telegraphed it. Every team in the NFL is honest with their moves. I don't think anybody really is like faulting them for leaking that they were interested in trading Amari Cooper. Where they telegraphed it, and shout out to BTB's Connor Livesey, he's noted this, is in the way they utilized him down the stretch last season. That was when they telegraphed. They were so obvious from November on, and put whatever stock you want into the vaccine argument, whatever. But from that break point on, it was evident that they had no interest in him being a part of the team in 2022.
Yeah, and that is kind of odd to me because, okay, we're going to move on from this guy, so let's scheme him up to be out there as much as possible, especially on those risky routes where he's liable to get his clock clean. I mean, that's the cynic in me. That's if you're going to not keep a player, get as much out of him as you can before he goes, because he's on your roster right now. You're trying to win games. But yeah, the fact that Steven came out and talked about Amari Cooper's cap hit and DeMarcus Lawrence's cap hit. And
and to that point, again, not to interrupt you, Tom, but he has already, and we all, not that I don't think anybody's like wants Zeke gone, but everybody wants that contract on. Like everybody's ready to purge themselves from that. But however you feel about that, Steven's already doing the same thing with Zeke. Right? Literally, as soon as the draft ended, well, Zeke's making a lot of money. Well, whose fault is that, Steven? Like who signed that check? Who designed this system? So go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, exactly. It's obvious nothing has changed. It's like, they bungled the Randy Gregory thing, which no matter how they paint it, they clearly wanted to keep him at the same price he signed when he departed, and they failed to get that done because they have certain quirks in their contract language that aren't standard throughout the league and weren't prepared to address that soon enough, and kind of apparently the agent didn't catch that, and it kind of surprised them when they noticed it was in there. And then they've come right back, or Steven has come right back and is now making the same arguments about Zeke. It's like they're not letting people forget that this is who they are. They're throwing it in our face.
You know who I feel like, Tom, as a Dallas Cowboys fan? Have you seen the movie 50 First Dates? It's an older movie at this point in time. With Drew Barrymore.
I didn't catch that particular rom-com.
That's okay, Tom. That's okay. So the premise of the movie is Drew Barrymore has been in an accident at some point.
I may have watched that after all.
And so she thinks every day is the same day. She thinks every day is like the same. So she lives this day out in the exact same sequence every single day. And like her family and the people around her cater to that because they love her. So like her father, for example, has like thousands of the same newspaper printed, you know what I mean? So that every morning he can like, set that out. And every day, because the day of the accident was his birthday. So every day she believes it's his birthday. So like every single day she bakes him a birthday cake, and they go through the same routine every single day. And she goes to sleep at night, and her memory, rewinds. That's her like condition in the movie. And her father and her brother like set themselves up to whatever. And it's when Adam Sandler comes in and is like, well, let's try to help her. And then they fall in love, whatever. I feel like the father and the brother, right? Like we're trapped by this. Like, and I don't know that you believe they're trapped, in that movie, but we're trapped by them just keeping us in the same day over. And because again, we're literally on this same cycle with Zeke. The difference though with Zeke as opposed to Dak or Amari or whoever is that people are fine with them moving on. You know what I mean? So they'll feel justified, like they're doing the right thing here. It's like, no, you're going about this the wrong way. We should have never been in this particular instance to begin with.
Yeah, and that's, I think, if you want to talk about why there might be apathy or even a sense of depression, is the fact that we know that's not going to change. There's not going to be significant change because the Jones family set the tone and direct so much of what happens. They have more influence, I believe, over the coaching staff than any other ownership in the league. And Steven is going to be carrying it on for years to come. And I'm not even sure that Jerry is not a good influence in trying to kind of keep him from going too far a particular direction, and wonder what will happen when Jerry's influence is not really a factor anymore.
So Steven spoke with Mike Florio a few weeks ago. We wrote about this as well. And talked about why he doesn't like free agency. And it was the same old party line. So in that sense, it wasn't depressing. But to your point, it was depressing in the sense of, so this hasn't changed. So nothing is, nothing is going to happen whatsoever. Like you just believe this for all of time. Jerry spoke to Peter King recently, Tom, for Monday's Football Morning in America. And did you see this? Did you read this? I wrote about it as well. So if you didn't, my feelings are hurt, whatever. Okay. But anyway, the Denver Broncos are going to be sold soon, and they're supposed to fetch somewhere in the neck of $4.5 billion. By the way, I talked about this with Tony Casillas on the 750 this week. And so Peter King asked Jerry what he thought the Cowboys could sell for it. He got an evaluation and was told it'd be around $8.5 billion. And Jerry said it'd be north of $10 billion. But I'll never sell, whatever. And so they had a conversation. Peter King wrote about it. But the very end of the conversation, Jerry says that he tells a story about when he first bought the Cowboys. He was having a meeting in Los Angeles with some representatives from Fox, and that at the time the Cowboys had drama going on, players out of line, and that Jerry swore, when I get back, I'm going to put a stop to this, whatever, this and that. And that the Fox executive told him, don't you dare, the Cowboys are ratings gold, etc. This is Jerry's quote. The foibles, by the way, I love the word foible, like great job, Jerry, there. But the foibles, the soap opera, the issues, They create interest. Add in the Senior Bowl, the Combine, free agency, the draft, training camp. We always got something going on. People follow us year round. The owner every now and then gets in the paper. It just adds to the interest. All of it. People love that.
Not all of us. Really.
But you know, like but that's one of those like quotes, kind of like the Steven thing, a totally different subject matter, but it just reinforces that like this is never going to change.
That is a key element of his mindset, and it has been ever since the glory run of the 90s. You know, it developed that hubris, and he's never lost it despite the quarter of a century since we've seen that kind of success with the team. That's soon going to be 30 years.
The 92 team turns 30 this year, Tom.
Mm-hmm. And then 3 more years. And so, you know, they've got a very short window to stop that from happening.
I actually think it would be amazing. It'd be horrible if they got to a 30-year drought, because then you'd have an equal balance. Right? You have 30 years of success and then 30 years of a drought. And in the first 30 years, not only had they won 5 Super Bowls, they had appeared in 8. That's absurd. Like, to think about that, he almost appeared in a third of all Super Bowls, and that they could have squandered that entire lead over, you know, literally twice as long is amazing to me. But you're right, the hubris, the fact that he himself would say the owner gets in, you know, throws his hat in the ring, gets in the mix, you know, is on the radio every once in a while. People love it. He does. He believes that people eat it up, and there are people, right? There are people, Jerry, but like.
Oh, you see him interacting with the fans. It's obvious this man eats it up. He lives for the applause or the booze.
He's Tinkerbell in that sense. But I do think and I mentioned this on the SB Nation NFL show, an example of how because, you know, they make it difficult, Tom, to refute the idea, because people will say like they don't care about winning, they only, you know, care about money, and I don't personally buy into that logic, but they make it difficult to hold that position. Like they make it difficult for me to defend the idea that I believe, at least. But an example of when I do believe this is, and I said this at the time, the week after they lost to the 49ers in the playoffs, Jerry went on 105 to the Fan. I know you remember it well. We talked about it, and refused to commit to Mike McCarthy. Was outright asked for an opportunity. Is Mike McCarthy coming back? And he refused to commit to Mike McCarthy. Why? So that weekend on every pregame show on NFL Network, whatever, there would be a segment devoted to, are the Dallas Cowboys going to bring Mike McCarthy back, et cetera, et cetera. And then what's more, and this is where Jerry is starting to, you know, show a different side, not a good one, but is when he then reappeared on the Fan, he got upset. He said, well, you guys made this a story. I didn't make this story. No, Jerry, you had every opportunity to deny this. So when people were saying Dan Quinn, Mike McCarthy, it was because you created this whole firestorm.
Yes. And it's absolutely what drives many of us crazy is that you don't really know how well considered some of these football decisions are, and how much of it is just kind of an off-the-cuff emotional reaction to the circumstances. And that's uncomfortable. I would like to have leadership and ownership that was more thoughtful, more analytical, more reflective. But we ain't seeing that. And that's kind of why the frustration is built up, and why I plan to stay skeptical, you know, right up until the point that probably when we're starting to know how the team is really doing in the playoff seedings. You know, very late in the season, I may get some enthusiasm back, but until then, I'm kind of going to be waiting for the balloon to burst.
I guess like our last question, and by the way, I messaged you to keep going that my dog was barking.
I was reading on that.
Oh no, that's okay. But so there's a UPS driver. He better be delivering like gold to us right now. But anyway,
I most of the show I've been sitting here scratching my dog's ears, keeping him nice and quiet and calm. Because he was over here seeing what Daddy was up to.
Well, our house is seemingly under threat, so Bear is protecting it. He actually fell. He's fine, but he fell off the couch, like freaking out about this. My question, before I go back on mute, what is required to like pull you back? Like what like if you have to put like an answer on that, like what, because I think we're all like grappling with that question this offseason, right? Like we can all sit here and we could just sit and stew, right? And be mad, like, I'm so mad at the Cowboys. They let me down. They hurt my feelings. Okay, cool. Like, fine. You have a right to feel that way. But like what pulls you back? Like what decision, what accomplishment has to happen for you to feel like they're worthy of the way you used to feel?
It would probably, to actually get that feeling and feel secure in it, would be making it to the NFC Championship game. I'm not going to say they have to win the Super Bowl, but they have to prove they are relevant, that they are one of the top tier programs.
But what if they made it and I know I think that's a fair answer, but like to like peel the onion back, what if they made it because in the divisional round they got a lucky call? You know what I mean? Like what if a fluky, tipped pass happened? You know what I mean? Like the results in the annals of NFL history are littered with those like butterfly effect moments, to where you're boiling it down to like just almost a matter of luck, and so I get your answer and I think I agree with it, but it is possible that they achieve that in a non-impressive way.
Well, you kind of answered it yourself. How many times before has that been the case? How many times has a team made it that far and they probably got there over a better team than they actually were?
I would argue the Niners got to the title game, and not that the Cowboys were better, but I mean you can make that argument. But that the Packers are better. I mean the Niners beat them without scoring an offensive touchdown.
Yes.
Beat the quarterback who won MVP back-to-back years, who's one of the greatest of our generation. So I would argue that it literally just happened. You could make the same argument for the Bengals. You could argue that they were, and I know that the Bengals didn't beat them, but they were not more worthy of the Bills of being, opposite of the Chiefs in the AFC title game. And maybe they just caught the Titans on a bad day, and that's the magic of the NFL playoffs. But like if the Cowboys had a Bengals year, would you like it would feel somewhat hollow? It wouldn't feel like impressive to me.
I think luck has always been a part of the NFL, and just some people are going to get breaks, and you have to set yourself up to take advantage of the lucky breaks, and just showing some ability to do that would be encouraging. Now, does that mean I'm not going to enter the next season with a healthy dose of skepticism? Because they're going to have to do it more than once to really get me bought back in.
I've said this before too, but on the subject of luck, because it is amazing that at this point, luck hasn't smiled on the Cowboys. And maybe you could argue that it did last year, like with the turnovers and the, things like that. But there's a line I think about so much. And I've talked about this before, like I said, but have you seen it's very popular YouTube video of a very upset Cleveland Browns fan upset in 2007? And he's yelling at the stadium, just like in total, like, anger, as if he's yelling at the team, but he's yelling at the stadium. Do you know what video I'm talking about?
I don't think I've seen it, but I think
it's where the term
got sampled.
It's where the term factor of sadness came from, because he refers to the building as a factor of sadness. But he has a line in there. Because that same day that the Browns lost the game in question that he's venting about, the Chargers were at Lambeau Field and had this, like, I don't remember the score, but it was like a 47-41 sort of like crazy game, whatever, a super like offensive explosion, whatever. So this person is yelling at the Browns stadium and he says, "Do you realize that it is actually statistically harder to be this consistently bad than it would be for you to sometimes accidentally, occasionally be good?" And the Bengals are kind of an example of that, right? Like you just had your luck year, right? Like like the stars aligned for you, and you didn't win the Super Bowl, but like it happened, right? Like luck smiled upon you, and you at least got there. And even that hasn't happened for the Cowboys, which is amazing.
Yeah, Ben, that's because they do have one very consistent thing. It's people who sit and hold down the GM job and executive vice president for personnel. So.
Tom, I hope this conversation was helpful and therapeutic in some way.
It's a little bit of therapy, because you have to talk through your issues, and I don't think it's bad to go into the season without drinking the Kool-Aid, without being totally bought into your team, with wanting to see them prove something. I think that can make for an enjoyable week, because you can say, okay, let's see what you do this week.
I think what it is, Tom, is we normally go grocery shopping on empty stomachs. And what you're saying is, I'm going to eat a full meal. and then I'm gonna go hit the store.
Yeah, not gonna go over to the bakery section and load up on the no bake cookies. Nope.
They're intense. But okay. Tom Ryle is on Twitter at Tom Ryle BTB. You can hear him every Thursday on the Blog of the Boys podcast network on Riled Up with Roy Watt. You can read him at bloggingtheboys.com. If you need his social security number, his DMs are open and he'll definitely give it to you. Tom, the last however many words you want belong to you. Make them great. Send us home.
RJ, it was kind of fun just sitting here and chewing the fat with you.
One love.